little bit about who we are and how we got on this journey of stewardship. I grew up in a house where I was always fed and sheltered and clothed, and both my parents worked, good jobs, and there was not a lot of anxiety that the rent was going to be paid on time or the mortgage was going to be paid on time. We went to church every Sunday, really important part of my growing up. But my parents, for all they provided us, didn't model necessarily the best giving. Giving to the church was an obligation and was frankly a really small portion of their budget. And because of that, or in part because of that, I never grew up with a model of what it looked like to have people who thought it was really important to be generous givers. In fact, my first job out of college, I was a child abuse investigator and a foster care worker. And one of my jobs was to certify foster care homes. And I'll never forget, I was 21 years old, and part of what you do in a review of a foster care budget is a foster care home is you review the family's budget. And I reviewed this family's budget. He was a pastor, I think, or no, he wasn't. He worked for a company. She was a stay-at-home mom. They had a tiny little income, and they gave 10% of it away with a daughter who was about to be married and a son who was going to college. And I thought that was the stupidest thing I had ever seen in my entire life. Why on earth would you give 10% away? I mean, I really could not wrap my head around this. My story is long and it goes on, and I won't make you listen to all of it. But I will say, you can kind of guess from the collar around my neck, I eventually got to seminary. And I knew that when I graduated from seminary, I'd be working in a great church and getting a lovely paycheck, and that I was going to be expected to give some of it back to the church as a pledge. I did a little bit of surveying of my friends. How much are you giving? How much are you giving? And I gave what I thought was the absolute bare minimum to get by without being made fun of, without having people go, oh my gosh, look how little she's giving. I gave, and it was a bill, just like my utility bill that I wrote off to the church. And stewardship time would roll around, and I would give a speech about how giving was important, and that was that. So about 2.5 years ago, someone suggested to me that I try out this conference put on by the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, TENS. I encourage you to write that name down. We'll write it up here again later. TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. And I went. And I was so excited when I checked in because they gave me this notebook that was this big. And I thought, yay, here is the notebook for how to put on the perfect stewardship campaign to increase my pledging at my church, and this will be perfect. They gave me none of that, absolutely none of it. What happened in that time, and it was a short workshop, just a couple of days, at that workshop, was that people talked in a way I'd never heard before about what giving did for them, for their lives, for their relationship with God, and their relationship with the community around them. I was brought to tears on more than one occasion, and I'm not someone who tears up a lot, by these stories. And I found myself in this workshop being somewhat broken open and wanting, for the first time in my life, to actually give sacrificially, to strive towards a tithe, not because it looks good on paper, but because I believed it could do something for me in my life and for my relationship with God. So I have to say stewardship's a relatively new journey for me to do with passion, but in those 2 years, I feel a little bit like St. Paul. Sometimes it's like, oh, you got to go out and do this. This is so important. I came back to the church with a lot of energy around it and invited a group of people who I thought might have an interest or a passion in this. I told them that they weren't going to be the stewardship team, but that I wanted them to study a book with me, and that we would just spend a couple of months reading a book together and looking at how stewardship affects our lives. And that was what has gone on to become our stewardship ministry team. And at this point, I will say that my journey continues. I'm still not a tither. I hope to be within the next few years. I'm working towards it every year. And it continues to be a journey where I am, every time I give, perplexed and delighted in what I learn about myself and about the God who created me and our relationship together. So I'm going to stop and say Levi's going to tell you a little bit about who he is and how he got here, because his story is a little different.
I grew up with a Southern Baptist preacher for a father, and a Southern Baptist deacon for a grandfather, and a Southern Baptist Sunday school teacher for a mother. So tithing was something that you just did. I mean, 10% was God's sort of minimum tax on the Christian. Anything above that was an offering. We had tithes and offerings. So that was the background that I grew up in. And then I got to college, and like many people do in college, I kind of got out of church, became disillusioned with church, and thought basically that giving to church was just a big Ponzi scheme for funding whatever the church's political, in the Southern Baptist Church it's a lot of conservative causes, in other churches it's liberal causes. This is just a way to fund their political agenda and to prop up the clergy so they can all afford their fried chicken budget or whatever it is that they do with their money. So I stopped giving and going to church. Well, I went to college and I went to law school in Bloomington, Indiana.
Yay.
Is that where you went to school?
Yeah.
It's a good school. In 2006, I graduated and got a job in Chicago at the public defender's office, and my partner and I moved to Chicago. And by this time, we had both, he was a Methodist growing up, and both of us had been out of church for years. I thought, it's time, we're adults, we can get back in church. So we walked into St. Peter's the first Sunday in December of 2006 and sort of just stayed. That was the end of our church search. But we still were, sort of like Sarah said, what is the minimum that I can give and get by with being a member of this community? And so, initially we didn't pledge, and then it was like, oh, we're going to have to pledge if we want to vote at the annual meeting. We had to leave after the potluck. So, we started pledging, and looking back, I realized, we didn't think of it at the time, that pledge represented 0.8% of what our income was, and in a way I'm ashamed of it, but in a way you also realize that's just part of the process, and you got to start somewhere. So, that's where we were at, and then I got suckered into this book club, which was really just a little stewardship committee in the Journal, which I didn't know. So we start reading this book, and it starts talking about things like costly giving. It starts talking about things like if you're not giving in a way that makes a perceptible difference in your household budget, in the way that you live your life, you're not giving enough. If you don't miss it, you're not giving enough. And so I started to feel what Baptists call being under conviction. I'm like, this is really bad. And I remember going home and having these conversations, and it was like, well, we can't give anymore. We've got all this student debt, we've got all this credit card debt from our big move to Chicago between the time I graduated and the time I had a job. We can never do this. And then I had this financial planner that's helping me, get things set up for budgeting and everything. And I said, I'd really like to tithe someday, but we just can't do it. And little did I know, my financial guy was a Baptist. And he said, well, of course you can do it. And here, he worked it all out, it was like a math problem to him. And I looked at it, and there was on paper, there was no reason that I couldn't do this. He said, you could have those credit cards if you would commit to those credit cards, paying them off the way that you commit to going to McDonald's 5 times a week or whatever. You can have those paid off in a year and be tithing, And so I took the bad news back home. I'm like, the guy says we can do this, so really it's time to put our money where our mouth is, basically. If we believe this stuff that we're learning in this book, and we believe what God is calling us to, not only in the Bible, but if we read the Book of Common Prayer and we read the canons of the church, it calls us to that 10% number, And so that's what we decided to do. So we got the credit cards paid off. That was the thing that because I don't believe God wants us to have to go into debt and mortgage the house to do things either. Paid that off, made the commitment to do that, and we've been doing it now for it's made our relationship with God, I think, better. I think that one of the things that we wall off from God sometimes is money. You can have, I'm not going to cheat on my wife, and I'm not going to watch dirty movies or anything like that. But my money, that's my thing. And I really think that part of what we're here to say is we need to knock down that wall. That's part of our Christian walk too. So that's where we're coming from.
I would just add to that, the theologian Walter Brueggemann says repeatedly, the greatest challenge to our spiritual lives is our relationship with money. And I come back to that time and time again. The greatest challenge in our spiritual life is our relationship with money, because we don't want to talk about it. We certainly don't want to look at it. We certainly don't want to be, I don't want to be challenged as I drink myself. So, trusting much more will be revealed.
I have a question,
yes.
and maybe you will get to it eventually, but how do you separate your church giving and your community giving and the Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, all of the competition that the church is encountering today with, how do you roll that all into is that part of your pledge, or is that part of your tithing, or is it, do you separate it?
For me, I do. I separate out. I will say I include my seminary in my total for my church group. I mean, what I give to the church. But if I give to NPR, I count that separately. For me personally, if I'm doing the numbers, which for me, but I think that's a personal question. And the church will tell you that 10% is the standard to give to the church. There's a fair amount of movement these days, I hear, and there's some folks that'll say give 5% to the church and 5% to others. So I think some of that's a question that has to be decided at a more personal level, and maybe, but I would encourage you to keep with the question. I mean, it's a good question. And not the first time you hear it.
Well, I was going to say, we also, there's a difference, and we can talk about this a little bit later, there's a difference between what we got this as one of the things we keep coming back to. Charity, philanthropy, and stewardship.
Yeah,
Charity says, here, I have this, it's mine, I want you to take it and use it however you need it. Philanthropy says, here, I have this and it's mine, use this to build a school, or use this to dig yourself a well, or something intentional, like I want you to do with this. Stewardship says, this is God's, everything that I have is God's, and I'm returning a portion of it to God. So it's not to say charity is bad or philanthropy is bad, but they're different. And part of what we do as a stewardship ministry is to realize that we give for different reasons and get different benefits when we give as part of stewardship rather than just as a charity or a political donation or something like that. Although if you like giving to seminary, or like I know my parents, Baptist church, part of their tithe a lot of times was if they had a neighbor that was out of work, part of their tithe went to help them pay the electric bill. So the reasons you give helps to, if you're doing this for a sanctified purpose and see it as part of your ministry, then
We'd like to transition from here a little bit and have y'all help us out a little bit, and ask you, in your experience, what have been some good examples and what have been some less helpful examples of things that have happened in your experience of stewardship campaigns, stewardship education? What are some examples? Let's start with things that have been good.
Don't all jump in at once. Well, I think it's helped to build the church. When you, as a church, are going through some difficult times and everything, and there's two sides of the church. There's the spiritual side, but there's also the business side that you have to provide your utilities, keep the building for repair. You want to pay your staff a fair salary and benefits, and that you have to show a need to the people. And I think the experience here at St. Paul's the last few years, we have shown that need. We've had some good responses.
Okay, so showing a need. All right. Is there another example, any stewardship campaign that you've experienced?
Set a goal.
Set a goal. Any sense of why that, have you experienced that work or?
Yeah, people, the more concrete a thing you give somebody to do, the more likely they're going to actually do it, rather than just a general aspirational statement.
I think people like to fund a specific need that they can identify with. I think one of the most successful ones we had here was when we needed to fund a 3-year salary for a youth minister. And we were overfunded for that one.
What else has worked? What have you seen that was good?
publish the figures. Publish the figures, publish the weekly income, publish the average pledge number, maybe even publish the range of pledges so that people can see where they, not with names, but so they can see where they fall on that spectrum. That tends to be a pretty good motivating factor, and it demystifies the process.
When I was talking about, giving 0.8%, I was in ignorance. I thought maybe that's what everybody gave, and so I think that's an excellent idea.
I'm going to let you, if you want to come back to good, we can. But I'd like to know, what's been less helpful? I don't want to use the word bad, but have you experienced anything where you're like, oh, that makes me want to turn and run the other direction?
Well, if you've asked money for something and you didn't use it for that purpose, you will lose the trust of the people that gave that money, because they say, well, in the future, I gave this money for this project and it was never done.
Let me ask one last question. Can somebody describe for me what your stewardship campaign is like at your church this last year? What was your last, what was, yes?
We just send out a letter with the pledge cards, and put back into the...
Letter with pledge card. Anybody else have a different experience of a stewardship campaign?
We had testimonials through the, I'm going to say the 4 to 5 weeks before we would say Pledge Sunday testimonials in front of the congregation. Also, we had some put out in our epistle.
So like a written testimonial?
Written plus verbal.
Who does those? Lay people?
Yes.
Okay. Other examples, different things you've had in a stewardship campaign?
We have called upon people before, face to face, met with them to discuss needs.
Have you been one of the people doing that?
I have.
How is that experience?
Last year it wasn't really beneficial to us. We met with, I think total maybe, and I don't know if the dean could help, but I thought
I met with 9.
I met with one, with Bernie.
It didn't increase the pledges appreciably.
No.
Were you going to ask for money?
Yes.
Yes. I would say though, we also offered to people that if they wanted to discuss it with us during this campaign, we'd be glad to sit down with them. In my experience, I didn't really have anyone that called me up and said, Bruce, can I sit down and discuss my pledging with you? That did not happen, but at the same time, I offered this to people. We, as a stewardship committee, offered that to the congregation.
We found that if we said in the follow-up process, we haven't heard from you, haven't received your pledge card, and we'll expect to see that by a certain date. Otherwise, we'll call on you.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, that's always
and
a
suddenly they all arrive. So.
It's the Iron Fist in the Velvet Club.
Other things you've experienced in your campaigns? Okay, that's good. That's good. All right, you go next.
Oh, okay. Well, I just, are we going to do what do people want to become? Think about people who inspire you, or think about maybe not even a real person, but an idealized person. And think about what kind of people would you like to become? What are some attributes that describe the person that you hope to be, or you hope that people see you as now? So for instance, I'm going to steal the obvious one, generous. I would like to be perceived as a generous person.
So we're asking you to give us some adjectives. Believe me, we're going to tie it together, believe this or not, but adjectives of your ideals.
Honest, trustworthy.
Compassionate.
Sturdy.
I like that. God built me to be a sturdy person.
I didn't mean that.
Somebody else?
I think hardworking.
Hard work.
Try to portray the values of a true Christian.
Is that a fair word, Presley?
So let's move from that into how do you think the church generally, or stewardship ministry specifically, can help people become these things?
It's a hard question, but we want you to think about it for a minute. And we want you to think about your experiences in stewardship campaigns. Have they reflected any of these values?
Ask the question again.
But basically, how can the church experience, or the church as an organism, or specifically stewardship ministry, sort of move people into becoming this kind of person, from whatever they are when they walk through the door, to becoming generous people, Christ-like people, sturdy people, hardworking? How can we equip them to do that?
We have to really care about your church and your priest.
What are some other things you think might be helpful in a campaign? I think that's probably key. If you don't care about your church, you're certainly not going to want to invest in it, so to speak.
I think the fellowship.
Say the question again.
How can church, church as an institution, or specifically a stewardship ministry, move people from wherever they are in their life to becoming people who embody these?
Give them something to do.
Most important, and make them feel like they're part of it, and they're part of achieving the goal.
You're part of a church family. We're a family here. We're a church family.
So what do these things have to do with stewardship? You may be you ready to move on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think that sort of raises the question of what does this have to do with stewardship? Well, the question of how to begin moving towards some of these things is found in a lot of this, and most of us, I think, have not been raised in traditions that are in. I think stewardship ministries have often failed to be holistic enough to recognize that fellowship, for example, teaches us a great deal about hospitality, not only about hospitality, but about stewardship. I'll give you an example. I love this example because on Maundy Thursday every year at St. Peter's, we have an agape feast. After the liturgy after the Eucharist, we move into our parish hall. We have this huge agape feast that all the members of the parish bring. Somebody brings a bunch of grapes, and somebody brings some figs, and somebody brings some cheese. And like stone soup, it just somehow comes together into this magnificent feast. And when we talk about stewardship, we often will reference our agape feast as an example of what our community at its best, with all of us bringing, looks like. It is stewardship when we bring ourselves into not only the worship, but the worship that exists as part of our fellowship as well. Give them something to do. There's a phrase that I use all the time is money follows mission. If you're not clear why you're there, if you don't have a mission, people generally won't fund it. So you begin to look at what matters most to what you most want to be and how you get there, and suddenly stewardship begins to come into light and into life through it. We're going to have a little bit of time and a little bit where you can actually think about your own church and how you might begin to play with the idea of stewardship in some new ways. I really want to encourage you to think about, as strange as it may seem, adjectives that matter to your life and to the life of your church, and how you might begin to move those out of the world realm into the example realm. I will tell you, at St. Peter's, radical hospitality is one of our hallmarks. And you see that in our coffee hour, you see that in our agape meal that I just described to you. You see that when somebody dies. Good Lord, you've never seen so much food and so many offers to do that. You see that. You see that when you come in the door. Most people will tell you they're greeted generously. That plays out in how we do our stewardship as well. And that our stewardship forms our radical welcome. Our radical welcome forms our stewardship. It becomes all part of a holistic piece.
Should we pass out our information?
Yeah, let's do that. So we're going to talk for a little bit. I'm going to let Levi take the lead here and talk a little bit about what we've been doing at St. Peter's. I want to stress, one size does not fit all. This works for us. I will say, can I throw the number out? Mm-hmm. That over the past 2 years, we've had a 29% increase in our pledges. Which in the middle of a recession, we're proud of that. We're not wealthy. We're still operating at a deficit, but we're upward trending.
Has the membership stayed the same, or have you increased?
Ballpark.
Huh?
Oh, our numbers are up minimally, but they're nothing to.
Not 29%.
No, our numbers are not up 29%. In fact, we had several big givers who died. The numbers are in there, but our numbers for pledgers actually went down, and our numbers went up.
How large is your church? What is your congregation?
80 to 100 on a Sunday.
So I want to talk about some of the things that we have done. And when I made this list for this presentation, I had forgotten that we even did some of these things. And at times, and I know any of you who've chaired stewardship campaigns or been part of them, it can feel like you're juggling about 30 balls, and you got to keep them all in the air. If one of them falls out, you just think, "Oh my God, the church is going to fold next year. We're not going to have any pledges." Has anybody ever felt that way, or is it just me?
No, it's not just me.
So I think that moving out of that fear is part of what this whole process is about. That you've got to become not the person who says the sky is falling. Even when you see that deficit, you got to be like Churchill or Queen Elizabeth going out there in the ruins and just defying, come what may, we're going to be here, is part of what leadership is about. So anyway, one of the things that we've done, we've already talked about it, we moved from a time when we had one stewardship chairman who basically was the stewardship program.
Can I tell that story?
Yes.
I'll give you my down and dirty story of the bad stewardship campaign I did shortly after I got to St. Peter's. We had a committee of one, and there had been a history of this kind of fundraising. I'd never tried it. The stewardship time rolled around. Suddenly, programs have been trying to get off the ground. Our committee member was overwhelmed. We were trying to throw together a campaign like that, as fast as we could. So we did the $5 a week challenge. Could you give up your Starbucks or your Subway once a week and throw add $5 to your pledge a week, and increase your pledge by $20 a month? Was sort of our campaign, one of my first years at St. Peter's. And people did it. We probably brought another $2,000 that year in pledge dollars. I don't know the exact amount. The problem with what I did in that was, one, there's a level of shaming in it. That I've thrown away there's one of our cups over there. There's several Starbucks cups in this room. One, I love my Starbucks, so please don't ask me to get rid of it. Sometimes I've heard these campaigns directed at, if you young people would just give up your Starbucks. There's a pejorative tone into it, and sort of the idea that if you were just doing more, we wouldn't be in this situation. And that is problematic. The second thing that I find problematic with this is that it's nothing at all about what it's going to do for your life. Why would it make any difference for me to give up that cup of Starbucks and give it to the church, give it to God. There's no relationship to what giving has to do with what you receive. This goes back to Thanksgiving. And that there's joy in giving, that there's worth in that. And Levi keeps reminding me of this, so I'm going to steal your line. The third is this flat tax. So I can actually probably give up $5 a week, $20 a month. I could probably throw another $20 in the plate every month and not feel it too badly. There are people in my parish for whom that would be an extreme thing to ask, and it would be an incredible hardship. And they're some of the most generous givers we already have, and it would be a huge thing for them to do, and other people who would not even notice. So what are we calling people to? Are we calling people to give till it hurts, or are we calling people to examine the role of money and their relationship with God?
Give till it helps.
Give till it helps. Right. So to take away the idea of, and the last thing I'll add is that some of what came out in some of these early campaigns of if you just gave this much more was the notion that we were a sinking ship. That it was all over. If you just didn't throw in some more money. And who on earth wants to give to a sinking ship? Don't you want to give to something that's beautiful and floating and that you want to jump on board with? I don't want to get on board with that. I want to get on board with the one that's cruising down the river that looks great. So some of those campaigns that we try, that we think are, oh, this will work. I mean, I really thought, if I just asked my congregation, because I had it spelled out, like, if everyone who gives gave $20 more, we'd have this much more, and we could do this with it. I thought this was brilliant. And it's not that it was wrong. It's not that it was bad. But it took away some of the fundamental groundings of theology and the theology of stewardship that I think if we can start to incorporate those into our stewardship programs can actually help them grow more abundantly.
First, like Sarah has said, we've moved from a stewardship chairman, who was or chairwoman, where that person carried the entire weight of the campaign on their shoulders, to broadening it out to where we now have a 10-person ministry team. And this has a fourfold advantage. You've got a shared workload. No person feels overburdened. You've got more accountability in how things are done. You've got inspiration because you've got 10 minds and 10 sets of experiences around the table when you're coming up with some of this stuff. And then there's a legitimacy to it that, you've got people from different age groups, different income levels, different walks of life. So it's a broad cross-section of the church that when you come out and you ask people to give or you present something, has a little more legitimacy. I know I said that already, but then one person coming out and saying, okay, this is time to give, get out your checkbooks. Plus it's just a lot of fun. We have regular stewardship meetings. So rather than just getting up to September or October and saying, oh gosh, it's time again, let's throw something together, we meet once a month. Sometimes twice a month if we've got something going on. And we have changed our meetings from just coming together with an agenda, or sometimes, the worst meetings are the ones with no agenda, you're going to be there forever. We start with a devotion and a meal. We sit down, we break bread together, and as we're eating, we read a passage of Scripture, we talk about it, and the eating and the Scripture probably goes on for 15 or 20 minutes. We pray. We say a prayer. It's nothing fancy. We don't break out a Book of Common Prayer. We just freestyle it like the Baptists do. And then we begin our meeting. But beginning that sort of orients us to what we're there for. And it helps, nourish your body as well. You're a lot more in the mood, I think, to do business when you're not hungry and mean.
You'll hear a recurring theme. St. Peter's, we like to eat.
We like to eat. Bruce, is that your name? Mm-hmm. What he said about doing the devotionals or the testimonials is one of the things we've done. We call it ministry minutes, and we try and tell people, really, we mean just a minute. What we do, we tack this on to some of our liturgies after the post-communion prayer, okay? So before everybody leaves, we say just a minute, and somebody stands up and gives a testimony about one or two ministries in the church that have changed them, either through ministering to them or more often through their participation in that ministry. And it's run the gamut of people with different experiences. It gives people an idea of what they can do and what they can be involved in. Some of these ministries, as you know, go on behind the scenes. Nobody even knows that they're going on. But so it gives people an opportunity to see, here's something I can be involved in.
And we do these year round.
Yeah.
I'm confused. These are to show what you've been doing or what you've accomplished? Or
No, they're like in Baptist church we would call it a testimony, where you just stand up and say, you know, I've been part of the outreach ministry. You know, we gather, you know, a couple times a month to give, you know, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to homeless kids, and it's touched me this way.
Okay, so just a statement of somebody's personal involvement.
Right.
Maybe.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's good.
the focus really being how ministry, whatever ministry it is, has helped form and shape their life.
Mhm.
It's that idea of by giving, this is what I've gotten, reinforcing that in a way that has nothing to do with dollars.
Mhm.
One of the things I loved about our ministry minutes is that when we asked people to do them, they weren't about, we didn't ask you to talk about stewardship. We did, in fact, we actually liked it when they didn't talk about stewardship. And they were exceptionally powerful, some of them were exceptionally powerful, and it was a way to broaden our minds to see how does stewardship enable us to complete these ministries that we're doing, which was, I think, a powerful link for a lot of people was the realization that stewardship as a ministry brings us able to do the ministries that we love.
It took the focus off of all the talk about this money and brought it into Thanksgiving. And that was a huge thing for us.
Points to ponder is another thing we've done, and I know that's a cliched phrase, but we call them points to ponder in grace, gratitude, and generosity. When it gets to be around, we were going to do these year round too, and we had a hard time coming up with that many points. So when it gets to be around stewardship time, we're trying to orient people once again to thinking about their commitment to the church. So for about 3 months there, September to end of November, December, we publish these in the bulletin. Now whether anybody reads them, I don't know, but I haven't heard any negative feedback. And they're just little things like, you know, this week think about what's the best gift you ever received and what made that an excellent gift. Or what's the best gift or the happiest you've ever made somebody by giving. You know, just little things like that. And I don't, you're all trying to write this down furiously. You can copy my notes after if you'd like. Regular church newsletter articles, which I assume that's also what the epistle is, Bruce?
Pardon?
The epistle, you talked about the epistle.
It's a news, what's happening in the near future, going on and things like that. Yeah.
So we try to do, I think our newsletter comes out once every 2 months.
Is yours electronic or do you mail
It is now.
It just started being, our first electronic will, and we've got some folks who, you know, still will prefer the mail, but
Okay.
what we try to do in these is all, you know, say this is what stewardship's doing, you know, right now in the church, and if you're interested in getting involved, etc. But also do sort of a devotional type thing and talk about the rich young ruler, or talk about the, you know, the parable of the talents, or something like that, to kind of give people a year-round. So it's not just one sermon that they get in September, but it's or October, I guess it is.
Depends on the year.
Depends on the year. Stewardship frequently asked questions, which I think you guys actually have a copy of these in the at the end of your materials. And the reason we did this is we kept getting people who would come and ask sort of the same questions over and over again. So we thought, well, if this many people have these questions, why not take some of the ones that we've gotten about our stewardship program and answer them in sort of concise ways. And so this is something that we always have available at the back of our church for newcomers or for people who've just forgotten. And we keep it on our church website also. It talks some about the theology and the practice of stewardship. And I think that theology of stewardship is important. Why do we do some of the things we do? Well, if we don't know, then maybe we should think about why we're, you know, think about doing something different.
A great example of that is that we have an annual fundraiser, we call our gala. A lot of people thought, well, I spent $50 on my gala ticket and you spent $75 on silent auction prizes. So, you know, that's $125, which is what I pledge every month. So I just didn't turn in my pledge that month. There's a difference between a pledge and a gift. Well, I gave $25 for Christmas flowers, so I took that off my pledge. And so part of what we wanted to do is separate out some of those, and it was no malicious intent that they were not meeting their pledge. It was a not full understanding of what a pledge really was.
One thing we've done that's sort of a combination of the newsletter and the ministry minutes is called a meditation booklet. and we had a really good response to this last year. What we did is we invited several people in the parish, and we went to specific people, and asked them to respond to the question, how has intentional giving of time, talent, and treasure, changed you, basically, you know? And some of it, we had people from, again, all economic spectrums, all different levels of, along their spiritual journey. And the result of this, we put in a meditation booklet. We just printed it off on our copy machine, stapled it together, and handed it out for people to read one reflection a day during the month of October for stewardship. And we have some examples of that. That's actually what your packets
The
begin
first three
with.
things are,
We picked three, I don't want to say best, but three that were really excellent. That the meditation booklets have a threefold benefit, I think. Or programs like this. It doesn't have to be a book. But when you broaden that appeal, you get more people who feel like what you said, that they're part of the process rather than just somebody just preaching at them, that they are part of stewardship. Reading those meditations edified people who even were not part of it, and people found that their own faith and their own giving discipline was strengthened in just writing and reflecting on why is it that I really do this? How does this change me? So we had a pretty good result with that. I've just been yammering on here now I don't want to stop completely for questions, but has anything I've said so far been unclear, or I'll keep going then. Like I said, I grew up a Baptist. I could go on for hours. Stewardship letters were something that we revamped. And I don't, again, remember too many stewardship letters because I'm still fairly new to the parish. But we were very intentional about focusing these letters not on, gosh, we got to pay the bills, or gosh, salaries are, just eating us alive. It was, here's what we've been doing. We've broadened our outreach ministry. We've broadened our choir or whatever. And then moving that to, this is what you gave last year. Would you be able to give this much this year? And so that was a move from what we've done in the past to basically just sending out a letter for pledgers and a letter for non-pledgers.
You actually say, here's the amount of money you gave last year.
Right.
Can you help us out a little more?
Right. And I'll admit that when we started doing this at the suggestion of our canon for development in the Diocese of Chicago, and when he came and said this, I thought, Mike, this will never work. For two reasons. One, it's going to make everybody angry, and it's going to terrify our stewardship committee
and rector.
To sit down and do this. And do you know that I can only think of three people out of 75 pledgers, basically, who even had a question about it. Now, some people, and some of this is in the charts, so you can look at that maybe later, but not everybody gave what we expected. Some people exceeded what we expected. And I had a couple people come up and say, I never thought about it, but yeah, I could give that much, So we were pleasantly surprised.
In this, can you give more? Did you ask for dollar amount or percentage amount?
We asked for dollar amount.
The letter's on the back.
Right.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's really
sample?
good to read, the way it's worded.
Okay.
It's very,
I've forgotten that it was in the packet, so
Yeah.
yes, that is helpful.
It's real helpful the way it's worded. It's not like, this is what you should do. It's just say, for the time we pray that you will consider increasing your pledges. I think that's...
I think in that letter too, I confess I didn't read it last night, but in there is some of the wording about this is not just about the need of the church, but about the
Right.
opportunity to give.
Yeah, so this amount is not a demand or an expectation. It's written very well. I mean, rather it's a recognition that we have an opportunity to grow in faith.
Yeah, can we use that here? No, I'm sorry.
Because you can. We copied a lot of this from our canon for development and then added our own stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we would encourage you to make it your own.
Sure.
Right.
We're big believers that one size doesn't fit all, but we've begged and borrowed from all over the place. So
So I see you have it's a mail merge or
Mhm.
whatever. How did you decide how much you thought they should?
we did that together. So there were cases where pastorally we knew, some was out of work, and let's not ask for an increase, or minimal. It was frankly done over coffee,
Okay, so there was no
No scientific
Set, no
method.
scientific set percentage or anything.
No, I mean, that's one of the places where it's helpful to have someone who has ongoing pastoral responsibilities for the parish, who has a sense, for the most part, of where many people are. And, I mean, there are places that are big enough that the rector doesn't know everybody, but we're at the size that I know most of the folks. And, to be able to sit down and go, oh, no, really don't send that letter to them, because that's going to be really hard because of X, Y, and Z, and what can we do instead, that kind of thing. But,
The flip side of that is, don't, to use a Bushism, don't misunderestimate people. And don't rob them of an opportunity for a blessing. You may think, oh, I don't want to ask them because they'll be sensitive about this, or because I don't think they can afford it. And they may be tickled to death that you have asked them to do this and to be able to give. And some of the people who bless me the most are looking at ones who, I mean, they're not giving and going into the poorhouse, but they're giving, and you look at their financial situation, you say, how in the world can they afford it? But it's important to them. And that blesses my heart to think about those people.
I think back often to that story I told you about at the beginning of this family who had very meager income and rejoiced in giving the first 10% back to God via the church. And that was just part of who they were. And it's funny, it took me 15 years to learn from them, but I did. So, I mean, yeah, I think Levi's right.
One thing that is, you say this is terrifying, but then you think, I get letters from the Democratic Party saying, will you give this much a month? I get letters from, the Sierra Club or whatever, and they put a dollar amount in there. So I would much rather see the church thrive even than some of these other places. I'm not going to cast aspersions on the Sierra Club, but what is really important to me is the church. So I feel like the church has even more authority to ask for some of these things. If we really believe what we say, that we're not just coming here and singing of it, but we're saving souls and we're changing lives. What could be more important or worth increases in giving than that? The next thing that we did was have a festive meal, and I like a meal, and I like festivity, so this is like a twofer. But what we did is on the eve of our stewardship pledging gathering, we had a meal. It was a free meal, no tickets, RSVP so we can know how many people are coming. We had our guild space is not nearly as big or as ample as this. It was just a small, intimate little room. But we had candles. We had just spaghetti. We had 2 different sauces.
It was delicious, though. They made it.
We did. It was homemade stuff. We didn't cater it. We might cater it if we had more money, but
a little bit of wine.
I was going to ask if you serve wine.
Yeah.
And actually, the model for this meal, we got this from the Episcopal Network for Stewardship. Some people use this as this is where they make their sell for their pledges. You sit down, you get, I don't want to say liquored up, but you get, you're in the moment, you're in the evening, and they pop down a pledge card.
Laid back.
Right. We didn't want to do that. We intentionally decided not to talk about money because we figured people are smart. People can get this on their own. This was just a celebration of our life and our community together.
We wanted this to be, we wanted this to model what we were hoping our church models for each other and for the community. We wanted it to model abundance.
So you did this before
Stewardship Sunday the night before.
The night before the stewardship.
Yeah, but to be clear, we don't just have Stewardship Sunday. We have a month of
Right.
focus time, and then we year-round have, stewardship is in the vernacular year-round. So,
Right.
So you
What's it on for?
you constantly ask.
no, stewardship's not all about asking. It's about inviting people into, because stewardship is not just about money. So, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure I know.
yeah, so this was the night before the in-gathering, though.
Mhm.
So,
And we had, actually one of my professors from college is a big Episcopalian. I didn't know it because I didn't care about church when I was in college, but we've stayed in touch. And he just talked with us about something that you would think has nothing to do with stewardship. He talked to us about his wife living with and eventually dying with cancer, and how he found grace in the people that prayed for him, in the way that his church ministered to him through this, in the caregivers that she had. And it was a very, very moving experience. So I like it, I think we'll do it again. And it just gets people focused about what's really important.
One of the things that TENS recommends on this meal too is that it's not a clergy person that does it, it's a lay person. And ideally one who's a generous giver and outside your parish, who can talk about really well how giving has made a difference in their life. And he did that just beautifully, again, with a topic you would have never expected. Wasn't a dry eye in the house either.
Our in-gathering liturgy, which this happens on one specific Sunday. And the past few years it's been the last Sunday, it's not been the last Sunday in October because Halloween is the last, so we don't want any ghouls or goblins to rain on our stewardship parade. So, it's been the second to last Sunday in October. But what we do is we have lay preaching. Sometimes it's the stewardship chairman. In the past it has been just different people who are pledging, who giving has made a difference in their life. We have special prayers of the people that we write for the day. You've got the rubrics that you've got to make sure you cover everybody, pray for the bishops and all this. But you can do that in a way that orients people specifically to stewardship. And some of the prayers that are actually in the prayer book are...
Yeah, but we use those stewardship prayers all month too.
Oh yeah, that's true. And we have a special stewardship collects that we use, or that Sarah uses. And then we have a space in the liturgy for people actually to bring their pledge forward. It's like the closest thing we get to a Billy Graham crusade, where people stand up, we have some music, and people walk forward and they place that offering of the pledge in a basket there on the altar, and Sarah takes them and blesses them during the Eucharist.
Yeah, they stay up on the table with us. I will say the clergy all bring their pledges up too, because I don't know about y'all's churches. One of the things, I do mine electronically, but even if I did it by check, they don't ever bring the plate by me, so nobody ever sees the priest give. And so the clergy and the choir all come up, and those are people who frequently aren't seen throwing theirs in.
And I will say, I don't want to say we seed the pot or whatever, but we do talk to the vestry beforehand, like, it's going to be important that you guys are in that line, There again, the velvet glove and the iron fist. Not really. Not really. Then we do weekly updates, which I think is what
Thank you.
Dean, what's your last name? Can I just call you Bob?
Yes.
Dean Bob.
I'm looking at our service bulletin for tomorrow. What we do is we publish, last Sunday was May 8th, pledge giving, 49.43. Other offerings, 10,070. Designated giving, 4,230. Total Sunday attendance. Then at the bottom, right under that, we say pledged income required weekly to fund St. Paul's budget, $7,400. Total income required weekly to fund this parish, $11,485. And the figures are all right out there.
Mm-hmm.
Because our treasurer, Bruce Landwehr, believes there should be no secrets.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Lay it all out there.
Transparency is really important.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Well, that was another thing that, not to cast any aspersions on anybody else, but when it's just one person, when it's one stewardship chairman doing the thank yous, those can kind of fall behind. Well, if somebody makes a pledge and they don't get a thank you till 4 months later, they don't feel really thanked and appreciated. So we've tried to make a point. Last year, the whole committee split people up and sort of, you take this many, and hand wrote the thank yous. This year, I sat down and did them individually myself as they came in, because they trickle in. If you've ever run, you get a big bunch of them front loaded, and then you get 3 or 4 every Sunday. But we got them in the mail Monday or Tuesday after they came in, so the people knew right away, we got your pledge, we acknowledge it.
We also acknowledge, and here's a little controversial point we did, we acknowledge the amount they pledged.
Mm-hmm.
Which is important because some people's handwriting is terrible. So like we had one person who it looked like their pledge had gone up like 2,000%. Well, it's because the decimal point wasn't in the right place, So when we wrote, thank you for your pledge of $200,000, they wrote back and were like, sorry, but that's not what, So it's a fact checker as well.
We've also had the opposite happen, where somebody writes something and you think, oh, this is the pledge for the year, and then you think, no, I mean that's for the week. So praise the Lord, that this, it's good to have clarity on those things. The weekly updates, going back to that, we make sure to do them in context. Not just say, well, we've got $100,000 pledge. Well, people hear $100,000, wow, that's great. If you don't know that it takes $250,000 to keep the church running, you can't put that in, we got to keep going, And having a goal is something that we did this year too. Rather than just pledge whatever and let's just see how we turn out. We set a goal of $200,000. We didn't reach $200,000, but I think we came closer than we would have if we hadn't set that out there for people to aspire to. A couple more things. We had a visual aid, and this was less controversial than what I thought it might be too. But what we did this year, and I don't know that we'll do it this way next year, but we had a tree. Okay, we made a paper mache tree, and as people turned in their pledges, we put their name and put a leaf on the thing. We didn't put how much they pledged. We didn't put, people who pledged this down here and this, you get at the top of the tree. But if you turn in a pledge card, even with no amount on it, you got a leaf on the tree. So this has the advantage of making people feel publicly recognized without, saying how much or how little they gave. But it also has sort of the backhanded reminder to people who, if they forgot, I haven't turned in my pledge card, they get in the guild room, they see this tree, I got to do that next week, And it's just a subtle way to do that. One thing that I think is really important about this kind of public recognition is if we have somebody who's in choir, or we have somebody who is in acolytes, or we have somebody who brings a casserole, we all thank them and we clap for them publicly. But you've got people who give year after year after year. Some people sacrificially, giving more than you think they possibly could. And it's a thankless thing to sit there in those pews and do that because you never get acknowledged. So this is a way, not just to send that thank you, but to say, we recognize that and we value that in the same way that we would if somebody who gives a gift of time or talent. The last thing that we did was in November, coming straight off of our stewardship month, we had a planned giving workshop. And this is, you're going to talk about death and taxes. So you got to figure out a way to get people there to talk about these things. And I thought we did great. We had 30 or 40 people who came. It was a 2-week session. The first week it was talking about things like healthcare powers of attorney, wills, trusts, how can you leave the church in your will. The second week was talking about funeral planning. What songs do you want? What songs do you absolutely loathe? If anybody sings "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple" at my funeral, I'll come back and haunt them. But they know that. So we gave people an opportunity to plan their funerals.
And we had a lot of fun doing it too.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a fun.
One of the things we did with the Plan and Giving workshop was we did hypotheticals. We used people in the congregation. Suppose this one marries this one, and then he dies, and she runs off with a yodeler. Who's going to get the money? Things like that to keep it interesting and fun. And we've actually got, I don't know if it's our website.
It's not in here. We want to make sure, we'll write our website up here. That resource is online, as is some of the things you have are online as well, but the meditation booklet in full is online, as is the PowerPoint and the manual that goes with the life planning.
And what I did, I stole the PowerPoint idea from the Diocese of Olympia. I don't know if any of you have ever used any of their resources. They are great for stewardship.
They're phenomenal.
So
Greg Rickles is the stewardship maker.
Olympia in Washington. So I took it and modified it with, I'm a lawyer, so I recognize that Washington law on wills and trusts and some of that stuff was different than what it would be in Illinois. But the one that we had, take it, modify it, and use it.
And please recognize that there's no legal advice implied in our PowerPoint.
That's true. Don't sue me if don't sue me. That's just a good rule, blanket rule.
What's the website for that?
Yeah.
I'll write it up here. I'll write it up again later, but it's www.stpetrs, Chicago.
Oh, it's on your letter.
Is it?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
on the
no.
back of the letter there.
I meant the one for Olympia.
Oh, okay.
No, no.
Well,
that's
Google.
not, I'm
You
sorry.
might have to Google that.
I have to Google it?
If you go under, you can Google Diocese of Olympia and Stewardship and you'll get tons of stuff. Our website, if you go under our ministries, you'll find our stewardship ministry team, and that has a lot of hyperlinks to resources.
So, like I said, I've been yammering for a long time. All of these things we talked about, it just sounds like an explosion of stuff. When you've got 9 people doing it, when you're broadening it out, asking people, can you help do this? I mean, for this ministry, or this meal, we had people who said, I'd be happy to do the lighting and sound for that. We got a great guy who is involved in the theater, and I'll do the lighting and sound for that, or people who say that I'll bring a dessert to this or whatever. The only areas of challenge, the only pushback that we got from any of this came from a couple people who were upset about the specificity in the letters. And what was the other thing? Oh, basically that some people didn't like the director knew what they were giving, or that the stewardship committee knew. And, that was a choice that we made, that basically we can't do our jobs if we don't have kind of an idea of what we've come from and where we're going. And I would say, though, that most of it has not been, oh, I can't believe you did that. It's been, why are we doing this differently? And when you explain it, oh, that makes sense, So one thing I'll say, don't be afraid to fail, but also don't think, well, that'll never work. Because if you had asked me 2 years ago, would this stuff work in our place, I would have said no, and it has.
Some of the things that we thought would never, ever work, the ministry minute came out of our book study, in the very beginning, I think, didn't it? And when somebody just sort of tossed out, wouldn't that be cool if we did that once a month? And I was like, oh my God, people would hate that.
Once a month.
People love it. People love hearing members of their community stand up and speak about how their community matters to them. It's a powerful witness. What are some other ones we thought would never work? We got some pushback from our vestry on the festive meal. Really? You want to spend money on that? And you're not even going to ask for money? That's a terrible use of our money. That's a terrible use of our money. But they came along, and I think are going to be. They upped our budget this year, so I think we're a little bit more willing to do that.
And part of what you have to be able to say, and you have to believe it yourself. Like I said, this is Winston Churchill with that cigar in his mouth. You got to say this is not just a trick to get people to give more. This is a ministry, and we believe in this. That this is important for people to grow in our church. Okay? So if people think this is just a gimmick, this is just you're going to feed me one night and then trick me into giving $1 million the next day, they're not going to buy into it. That this is something that is a journey that we're all on together, and we believe in this stuff. We're not just making it up as we go along.
It's also why you can take this, you can't take it and just throw it on your church and have it work. This works for us. I'll tell you, the meditation booklets are hands down one of my favorite things, but we're not doing them again this year because we've already done them. So we're in the process right now of brainstorming what could we do that would involve people in the same way, but would be different, that would, how can we put something on Facebook? How can we be multimedia? That kind of thing. We started brainstorming on that. And so changing it up and keeping an awareness of who's in your parish and where the need is a big part of keeping stewardship fresh and alive. But yeah, we used to have, our former chair used to say stewardship ain't for sissies. And she was right. When you invite people to discuss their lives and their money in an open and transparent way, it can be scary, but it can also be incredibly rewarding.
There's a little bit of Southern Illinois wisdom I got from a Baptist preacher one time. He said, when you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that yells is the one that got hit. And you have to realize that when, some of this is involved a little bit of, not casting stone, that's a bad analogy. But some of this is peeling away some of these layers that people have built around their money and their time and their commitments. And it's painful, but when it's painful, don't think, oh, that was wrong, I shouldn't have done that. Part of the healing, part of the growing process is taking away some of that old stuff. And you do have to be sensitive.
Yeah, so
But just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's just like when she stands up on Sunday morning and says something that's difficult for people to hear. That doesn't mean God doesn't want us to hear it,
How much of your success do you attribute to things you did differently, and how much to differences in how you communicated?
That's a great question.
I think that one thing that is true, not just in stewardship, but in life, is you can't say a thing too often in too many ways. So one sermon one time a year is not going to do it. And that's part of what we've been trying to do, is communicate it more often and to be more transparent, as we've been talking about. Publish some of these numbers. Publish how your progress is going. Publish when your stewardship meetings are going to be. If you want to come to the meeting, we're not doing anything behind closed doors. Come and hear it. Nobody comes. Nobody is eager. But when they hear, hey, this is a public thing. This is not just something that they went up to the mountain and came down with these stone tablets of a stewardship campaign. They're relieved, and So I think that's part of it. But I think that changing it from this is what the church needs to stay open to we as people of God need to give back to our Maker. And communicating that as often as we can has been a vast improvement. Not only that, but the idea that giving should be costly. You know, if you're giving in a way that you don't even notice the money being gone, you're not giving enough. Okay? It should make a difference in how you live your life and what your budget looks like. There's this great line from King David in 2 Samuel where he goes and he wants to build an altar to God on this guy's land. And the guy says, oh, you know what, you're the king, I'll give you the land. And David says, no, I'm going to pay for it because I'm not going to give to God the thing that costs me nothing. It ought to cost you something to give to God. So, communication, what was the second thing I said? Communication, as often as you can, and transparency. The idea that it's not about the church's need, it's about a person's need, and giving at a level that makes a difference in your life. We don't say 10%. 10% works for me. That's what the Episcopal Church teaches should be the baseline for stewardship. Not everybody's there. We've got other people who are past that, you know. Give it a level that makes a difference in your life is a good place for people to start.
I think a lot of where this started was with the book group, which sounds simple, but we started with a group of 10 people, which for our size is a good size. And so the people who, yeah, you're right, I did intend y'all to become the stewardship ministry too. I mean,
confession.
In Easter time. Well, I had an idea that y'all would be good, skilled at it. The people who began studying had, as it happened, I mean, it doesn't always happen this way, but a lot of them had conversion experiences just from studying this book together. And so when somebody's had a conversion experience, it's easier to talk to somebody else and say, this is what I experienced. So that began to have some ripple effects in the parish. The meditation booklets were an interesting exercise because we offered several writing workshops where we said, come in, we'll bring paper and a pen, and we're going to coach you through writing. Ask some key questions, you know, like what does it, kind of like the points to ponder. Write about a time when you've given something and it's meant something to you. Began to open up sort of the channel of asking some basic questions that are not, what does it feel like when you put $20 in the plate, but what's it like when your niece opens up your present on Christmas and her face lights up? What does that feel like to you as the giver? So that people began to ask in their own lives what the connection was. So we've had places like that where I think we've provided people with opportunities to have space to reflect on what it means to be a giver and how that affects their lives. You know?
One of the things that was really helpful to me to hear when we went to this Episcopal Network for Stewardship Conference in Indianapolis, this guy said, you know, if you help move people into becoming generous people, a lot of the benefit that's going to come from that is not even going to come to your church because they're going to be generous not only in your church, they're going to be generous to other charities, they're going to be generous to their family. And he said, you know, if you create generous people, that generosity is going to spill over into everything that they do. You know, it's not just I want to become a generous pledger at St. Peter's. I want to become a generous person. You know, I want to be the person that when I die, somebody could chisel generous guy on my tombstone and nobody would laugh if they knew me.